as we stated, if you are in any sort of business capacity, leadership capacity, financially gaining capacity with an organization, being a member or an audience member, an attendee of, is not an appearance of conflict. And we'd be happy to talk about any individual concern or thought that you might have outside of this room, that we can do case by case and get legal consult as need be. But this is just your annual ethics reminder.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I volunteer one afternoon a week at Great Plains Nature Center and I work at the front desk. Answer the phone and bring people that come in. I have no involvement with friends at Great Plains Nature Center. I don't know if that, where that fits in.
That's a great question. I would say because you're not in a decision-making capacity
No.
by any means, and you're not in a financial gaining capacity either for yourself or the organization. I don't know that there's necessarily inherent conflict there, although you are present in a staff adjacent role, there could be an appearance of conflict, but I would trust your judgment on if you feel like that's a conflict.
Yeah, I would say the same thing.
They list you as an employee.
Was that,
If they list you as an employee of that.
yeah, this answer is phone. I got a hawk with a broken wing in my yard. What do I do?
Yeah, and I will say, just as a reminder, committee members are on this committee because they're involved in this sector of the community or have a general interest in it. So it's anticipated that you're involved with these organizations to certain capacities. But what you just described is not, I would not interpret it as a conflict.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we had that came up is the need to shift some things around. And so I'm going to turn that over to Jesse to carry on that conversation. As we started to do it, I kept saying, nope, that doesn't work because of this meeting. And so here we are.
We have some staff conflicts with the calendar after the Q&A. So the Q&A, we're still planning on July 20th. But typically, the week after the Q&A would be the deliberations. We'd like to move the deliberations from the week after to 2 weeks after. So that should already be on your calendar as a meeting date. So August 3rd, potentially the 4th, would be deliberations. And then the date to finalize recommendations, which is typically the following week or 2 weeks after, would move. But that is the date where even Beth and I had trouble finding a uniform option. So we will send out a poll via email to find a date that works for everybody or the most people in order to finalize those recommendations. So for now, we'd like to cancel the meeting on July 27th. And then essentially we will find an additional one after August 3rd.
So unless somebody's willing to write the report in the absence of staff, I think we need to go ahead and do that. So unless there is, notice how I phrase that? So I would suggest that we go ahead and make those changes and ask Jesse to send out a poll to see when we can meet for those deliberations.
Yep.
Or to finalize our deliberations. And that leads us to the next item. During one of the Q&A sessions, we had some really, I think, pretty good attendance in the Q&A sessions, both Zoom and in person. We were asked by KMUW if they could apply because they are also under the umbrella that the Ulrich is under, which is the foundation. And so, you know, it was kind of like, So I asked city staff to check to make sure there were no limitations for them doing that with finance and or legal. And so what did you all find out?
There are no limitations from finance and legal.
There you go. That's what I like to hear. So, I don't know, I don't know what they're gonna submit for or what they're thinking about, but since they meet that criteria, I think we go ahead and Jesse, would you be the one that would be contacting them for?
Yeah, I can contact them and let them know that we're good to go. You know, legal just said, hey, just, you know, since they're the same organization, make the contract for both of them and then lay out in the contract who gets how, like, it's all stuff on the back end. that staff has to do.
So, but before we do that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they be parallel in some ways to downtown development? Which last year we decided wasn't necessarily qualifying because their primary purpose was not art or culture.
So that,
And I don't know that
I-
I would
yeah.
consider the primary purpose of KMUW art or culture.
I hear that, and that I think is the next question in the thing. The first was, can we have two organizations who share a parent organization in the foundation apply for funding? I think we found the answer to that question is yes. And so now the question sort of goes, you know, if KMUW applies, whether or not you all think that they qualify.
I'm okay with them applying. I mean, the application will let us determine if we think they meet
Right.
that criteria.
Right.
Right.
And if we can
Yeah.
take the conversation even back a little bit further, what I think spurred this is Jesse and I were at a meeting with PBS Kansas and KMUW was there as well. And the PBS Kansas mission statement on their wall, we were like, wow, that really aligns with the Arts and Cultural Funding Program. Like you probably would be an applicant that could apply. And KMUW said, what about us? And we're like, I don't know, maybe let's look into it. So this is, we're looking into it. And their mission statement does include arts and culture and programming within the community, but other stuff
Yeah.
too. So I think it'd be up to the committee to determine and their applications strength to see where they would fall. But from general compliance, can they apply? The answer we believe is yes.
Right.
So
I think so too. And that was what the question was
Yeah.
posed.
Okay.
Are we even eligible or do we need to go back and fight amongst ourselves? Funding's gonna
Yeah.
apply.
There's only
That's
one
fair.
WSU Foundation Oregon to apply,
Yeah.
There's multiple. The answer is multiple can. And so now it's up to y'all. Whatever.
Okay. I'm gonna turn it over to you to introduce Larry to.
I can take it. So we have a guest with us today, Larry Daniels with PBMC at WSU, who is the city's consultant for our strategic planning process for a new cultural plan, which tells us how to distribute funds for the cultural fund. Which we had a little bit larger of group today, but by no means, I guess my preface is we are not solving anything today. We are really diving deeper into the conversation of what, if any, changes need to be made to the cultural funding program. And or are we throwing it out the window? Or yes, we're throwing it out the window. What do we want to do with it? We're not solving it today. We'll definitely be engaging the committee throughout the process, but the goal is hopefully by the end of this calendar year, we will have established a new funding program that tells us how we're distributing these funds into the community. Is that sufficient?
I think that works great.
Thank you, Larry. Take the stage.
I know Beth and Cindy, do you mind just introducing yourself so I know your name?
Yep. Don Piana, I am the vice chair and I work at Cadence Stage's marketing and program director.
Thanks, Don.
Jerry Graham retired and 40 in Councilman Ballard.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. So when Lindsay and I were speaking about how to kind of frame this conversation, the question seems to be known that do we or don't we just throw out the funding committee as it currently is designed and create a new one? Or do we just kind of adjust what is currently there? So we kind of wanted to start from a place of framing. If we know we have this specific pot of money to fund this sector, what do we want to fund? What is it, not just I want to fund this art project or this organization, but what do we hope starts to happen in the community in Wichita because projects like X or Y are being funded by this? So I just kind of want to put that question into the room and say that that's what we'd like to spend some time talking about today. For context, we've been meeting with the steering committee for the larger strategic plan for a couple months now, and we've just done some focus groups. And you'll be getting a full report on this, but for now,
Oh boy, more to read.
yes, some things to just take away to just kind of add to the conversation. We did focus groups with current junior and senior performing arts majors. We did a conversation or a focus group with local HR professionals from Textron, Intrust, and High Touch. I always forget if that's what, we're gonna say it was High Touch. We did a focus group with community artists. We did a focus group with city staff. And there was a lot of common themes, but some key ones just to put out there is transportation and walkability of the city. That is a barrier to entry for people being able to experience art and culture. Community engagement, it feels like art and culture is very downtown central or Wichita proper, if you will, centralized in that way. And that if you happen to be south of Kellogg, you're kind of in an arts and culture desert. So how do we identify groups that are not in the main kind of trendy area? How do we give opportunities to groups to make art in their area, to make their area better as well, and not just keep feeding an area that's already kind of being fed into? Education, jobs, and kind of an arts workforce pipeline. There was some very passionate students in the the student focus group talking about how they're nervous to be graduating this year because they don't know that they can use their degree in Wichita as a performing arts major. And are there opportunities for them to be an emerging artist in Wichita, either as a performer or a creator? Could they go out into Wichita, and are there currently structures in place that are, oh, Lindsay's a new theater maker and wants to produce a new show, like, could she go do that? On the flip side, if Jesse's a new tech lighting person, can he go to a theater and get a job as a tech person? So we can dive into those. If anyone has questions, we can dive into that a little more deeply, but just high level right now. And then communication, how do we talk about what's going on where everyone knows about what's happening? And I think a lot of people were actually surprised to hear that this committee exists. And kind of a little bit of, if you know, or if you know someone you know, but other than that, it's not necessarily clearly communicated. So again, those are just some kind of high level points. And from what Lindsay has shared with me about the way you're all already communicating about this, I don't think that any of that would be new information per se, but just kind of opening the floor, initial reactions to some of those thoughts from the focus groups. Any surprises, anything new you hadn't heard before, or anything that you're like, oh, that really resonates with me?
I'm giving them all a chance to speak.
Transportation and the arts deserts, that's good. I know when we have our conversations, we look at those opportunities, but hearing specifically that we are missing out on that south of the Kellogg aspect of it. How do we communicate? And I mean, the discussion we've had in the time that I've been on here is how do we reach those smaller organizations? We're happy to fund exploration place, but we also feel that we are providing them more opportunity than the ones for the future growth. Like if I'm out here with the emerging artists, how do we funnel money specifically for these up and coming organizations beyond what we have right now, which tends to be a smaller pot.
So I would catapult, go ahead, Cindy.
Well, no, I was just going to agree with that and say that I think, Larry, the current structure, the current criteria have just always skewed toward the established and the traditional. And so it is hard to break into it. And sometimes it almost feels, having been on both sides, that there's kind of a sense of entitlement on the part of many of the existing organizations, that it's just something that now people expect to get year after year after year. And I don't know that that was really ever the intent of the program. I think it's just evolved that.
So I would kind of align up, actually, I'm glad you went next. Because my perception is we merely administer or make recommendations based on the criteria of the current plan. And so we were limited very much by the current plan. You know, it's for operational expenses. You have to, you know, have these certain thresholds that you meet. And I think there has been some I'll go off Dominic's. I think there's been some discussion amongst the group of here is a newer entity that we can't help, or we can't help to the level that we think we need to help, or you know, how do we get more artists? Because we have 3 grants that we do. How do we help artists? That's one grant. How do we help them? How do we help existing arts organizations develop their infrastructure so that they can be job ready, whether that's a professional, well, that would be different, but if they're a 501c3, how do we get them to work? But there's some really strong criteria in there. You've got to be up and functional for 2 years and all, you know, none of that. Those are all the restrictions or the criteria, I guess I would say, that have been placed on the committee. So I see us more as the reviewer using the criteria that we've been given to make funding recommendations as opposed to.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for articulating that. Were you gonna say something? Joe?
No, I just go on.
Yeah.
Think, you know, like Cindy's point, there's organizations that take it for granted they're going to, and under the plan, they are going to.
Mhm.
I mean, there's no argument against them. So,
I think it's a really tough time because I know this group has had some discussions that, you know, the importance of operating funds, because it's very hard to get operational funding, how critically important that is to an organization. But then that kind of limits you on how do you help new and emerging
Mhm.
organizations be part of that same picture.
With the current structure, those that may need the financial help the most are knocked down scoring wise because they do not have the financial structure already in place. They may be not the most solvent organization out there, and we are knocking them in their opportunity to get in a better place.
Right. So the way that the conversation, the way that we've been talking about this larger picture for the whole strategic plan process for cultural arts, and then how this focuses specifically for cultural funding committee is imagine a world where I almost brought in a funny question.
I did you? I was
almost-
waiting for it. You owe me 2, by the way.
I know. Imagine a world where this plan didn't exist, that was providing this criteria. Or it did exist and we've officially said, thank you for that, thank you for your time, old plans. We would like something new. Does the group feel like they have the ability to kind of imagine what new is, or do you feel kind of limited or like you're not allowed to, I don't want to say allowed to, but like have been given the autonomy to be like, no, we can reimagine this? Does that make sense?
In the existing structure?
Well, if we're saying we're open to a new structure, we being the city, does that feel clearly communicated?
I think if they were to go that way, assuming you wanted to keep this committee to make the funding recommendations and go to the city.
Right.
I think if the criteria changes, I don't think you're gonna see, unrest. With this committee necessarily, I think what they would do is reassess, okay, the criteria has changed, so now we need to evaluate based on the criteria.
Right. And I think that and I thank you for that, those words are helpful. What I meant is the criteria changing. The funding committee serves a wonderful purpose. This isn't about addressing that. It seems to be common knowledge that the criteria is limiting or creating barriers for the community. And if we were to be like, hey, everyone, we're open to changing the criteria.
We want to change the criteria.
Great.
We're not opposed to a change.
So for the rest of I have the rest of the time? Is that great? So for the rest of our time, let's put that into the room. We're changing the criteria. We're imagining changing the criteria, obviously with set steps of approval that need to happen. We're not making decisions today, but let's pretend that we are changing the criteria. So, I want us all to just kind of think about what would the end result, if there have been people being funded by this grant for years in the past, yes, we will address that. We will talk about how that is a part of this, but just from a perspective of new, what would you like to see funded that isn't currently being funded? Or what's going really well for you about what you're currently funding that you're like, that's great, but we need to fund it or do more of it. So I want you to think about that for a second. And I also want to acknowledge there's been some really interesting conversations in the community about how to provide grants that are, I think, changing the landscape of funding. Kansas Health Foundation provided a literacy focused grant for the past 3 years. And we had a conversation recently with Ed O'Malley where we said to him, I was saying to him, like, for what you wanted to do, which was improve kindergarten readiness to get kids reading on grade level, was this grant actually setting up the community for success to accomplish what you thought it would accomplish? Or did it actually work then? And that's kind of opening a door of, as a funder, are we funding the community correctly with what we hope that we can accomplish? So all that to be said, we want to reimagine that to say that the cultural funding committee is not a barrier to funding, that it is an asset, that something is needed and is not creating any unrest or frustration. So just imagine there's no right or wrong answer. What would you like to fund with this specific problem? What would bring you joy? What would fuel the community with inspiration or arts or culture in a new way?
Everybody's gonna probably, thank goodness there's no stems in here. I think the committee really, well, I'll speak for myself. I'd really like to see new and or innovative. So I'm not opposed to funding somebody that we've funded forever. But you know, I'd like to see something in their programming that is new and innovative. And I'm really torn. We put, we as a committee earmarked, for us, a significant amount of the funds for artists this year. With the caveat, because if we don't spend it, it's gone. With the caveat, with help from some folks in city staff, that, you know, we have an option too, if we don't have enough applicants. So, so I think that where I'm torn is operational dollars are so hard to get. I don't want to take that away, but I want to help those that are really trying to go a little bit outside the box, you know, so. And I don't know what to do with, you know, our developing arts hasn't worked. I mean, for all the years I've been here, developing arts hasn't worked. I mean, do we want to put a pool of money that's really much riskier? I don't know what the risk level of the city is. You know, what they don't want to do is they don't want to see their name on the front page of the paper because XYZ organization that we recommended funding for and they approved did whatever. So you know, tell me what your risk level is.
Yeah. It's a great question.
Because I think that's all key, because, you know, as I see my responsibility as a member on this committee is I want to do the best job in the recommendations based on the criteria that the city has given me.
Right.
To do what they need to do. But you hear it out of this group, innovate, it's not what we get, what they put in innovation, it's not really innovative, you know, and we're, you know, I think we've got to come to grips with that. I think there's a couple other things that need to be addressed somewhere along the line with what sounds like the significant changes that might be made in the plan. I don't know that that would be an issue, but some of the other things that we have struggled with is a for-profit that establishes a nonprofit that then comes in as, you know, meets the criteria, although they don't do actual programming. And so, you know, but my partner over here, we're funding that programming, and we have some of those conversations quite a bit. And we are funding similar types of organizations right now in that hospice. So, yeah.
I mean, to your point, this is a flexibility, like even that developing artist, it feels like it's very pigeonholed in there. And I'm with Beth. I want to make sure that it's operational, but if there's any way we can open that up some, because too often we get a grant in and it sounds like they're just asking us to fund programming, which is not this purpose. But if there's a little more flexibility in what we determine as operational, would be beneficial. And I don't know how, other than just saying if you're a developing arts organization, just put a grant in and we'll determine, because it does like the 2 years. It's hard. And the way I feel that is that should be your first step so we can get you into the larger operational pot of money to help you get sustainable so we can move you on.
Larry, when we talk developmental, so we're really looking for somebody that's a small organization. The criteria has it set up that we're looking for somebody, a small organization that has 2 years, and I get that.
Okay.
Kind of with the criteria they have, that has 2 years of operational experience that is now, I don't know how to get to the next level. I need a strategic plan, or I need a marketing plan. I don't have a skill set to know how to do that. Will you give me dollars so that I can then
Right.
go out? You know, which is not quite operational.
Sure.
But that's what that has been geared for. And so I don't know if there's a way to make that, bad choice of words, but I don't know what else to use, a venture type grant that has a little bit more risk to it. So maybe the pot is, there's a pot for artists, there's a pot for organizations regardless of their size. And then there's this pot for what I call the more risky and the venture, which might give a certain threshold
Right.
for this. Not that we've got oodles of gobs and millions of dollars
Sure.
to spend, but you know, something that kind of,
An organization where $1,000 would be transformative to them, you know, some organizations we give $1,000 to, they're like, okay, thanks, whatever. But we've had a couple that have come in where we know if we give them $1,500, that could improve their operation tremendously. And we just aren't able to reach out to them because the criteria is so, there's such a big barrier for them to show it in.
Well, say I'll add into the room something that, I have an artist background, so I'm a dancer by trade. And artists are not taught through when learning their craft to be a grant writer. They're not taught that they'll need to become an organization. And there is a big trend right now in artists becoming a nonprofit because it's their only access to funding, but they're not doing anything other than like, I want to put this mural on the wall, or I want to make this dance piece, but I'm being told I have to be a nonprofit. So they just start making things up, which I think is pretty common knowledge. And so I'm curious, again, coming back to this idea of imagining what could you provide? What if the cultural funding committee was in the business of funding artists to where it, like, you break that system down because you've created a system where they don't have to do that.
And that's, I think that's what we're trying to say, but not as eloquently as you just did.
These were all your words.
Well,
yes.
No, I think that's it. You know, Anthony even talked about the fact that artists tend to be more visual. They
Right.
go through and we're handing them a piece of paper, they
Right.
fill out this form. So
Right,
what if somebody could do a video submission?
right,
Which in the current process is just
right.
so difficult. But, and I think the other thing, Larry, is right now, the structure on the evaluation side is one size fits all,
Mhm.
and it's not,
Mhm.
you know, and I think that's where the problem comes with the innovation, and that's what I would love to see is the
Mhm.
flexibility for the startup, for the new, for the scaling to go through and to provide them with
Yeah.
those sorts of
Yeah.
Well,
things.
I'm sorry.
No,
You're right, it's one size fits all and heavily skewed to large organizations that have professional staff.
Mhm.
I mean, I can
Yeah.
remember what Elizabeth Stevenson, Fish House in 1 year, I mean, she had to do the whole thing by herself, make her 12 or 15 copies by herself. And she missed a page on one of her copies and there was questions whether she should get funded.
Mhm.
Well, you contrast that with what the symphony's doing or exploration plays with the staff, I mean,
yeah,
that always stuck out to me. I said, there's such a discrepancy
Mhm.
in what's going on.
and along those same lines. Yes, I'm an accountant, but I'm gonna say this application is heavily weighted do based on your finances, very heavily weighted. You know, what are your reserves? What are you, well, if you've got huge reserves, and I still understand, I understand the need for reserves,
Sure.
but you know, at what point do you penalize the person that needs the help the most because they don't have 3 months worth of reserves? And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot that's built in. Again, I understand the importance of this. What do they add to the economy,
Right.
our local economy? What piece do they bring? If I'm a 1 or 2 man shop, I'm not gonna make a huge dent in that economy.
Right.
So I think there's some things that really work against the small organizations that exactly put the large I don't know who said it, but the large organizations, give them kind of a one up in applying the points.
Can I speak a little bit to the larger organizations, Larry? So something that this committee, to my knowledge, has not previously dabbled in is the cultural institutional side of the funding program. So it's actually the same pot of money that funds our cultural institutions, that does our grant program. The institutions being the Art Museum, Aviation Museum, Museum of World Treasures, help me out, Jesse, Mid-America All Indian Museum, Arts Council, thank you.
She shows me it all the time.
The lovely graph that Jesse had to make for me because it's so confusing. But we have the more established organizations, they receive dedicated funding. It does have an annual report attached to it that's very similar to what we require of the grant recipients. But something that we're identifying in the overall planning process is there's no way for an organization to become an institution. And currently the institutional model is based around brick and mortar. Are you inside a city facility to some extent? But that puts the larger organizations in the grant pool, like Music Theater Wichita, Symphony, ones that have received funding a long time. But that's the only way that they can access city funded support, direct funded support. So is there an opportunity to break down the idea of the cultural institution or have a model to where at a certain level of success, as the current program identifies its funding success, to where we can pull those organizations out, put them into, I hate the word institution for the sake of what we have right now. But a way to put them in that pool and have different accountability measures for that. Is that a 3-year cycle for review? What does that look like? Because all those organizations are going to ebb and flow, but the grass is greener on whichever side of the street you're looking at from those organizations' perspective. But from staff's perspective, from finance, it's one pot of money. We know anything significant in changing that pot of money is going to be a struggle, but one thing that we are doing right now with this pot of money is we're creating silos versus championing community. And that's where by putting these buckets or these silos of you're an institution or you're a large organization or you're scraping by, we're not really building community. We're funding, and the funding is being used very well and effectively by those who receive it, but I'm gonna stop talking now, because I think my tangent is off. But how do we break down institutions or have a stair step for your organization fits in this incubator program? Or are you a business that you want to start a new art gallery and it doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or an LLC because you contribute to the community? I think there's ways that we can break down criteria on the smaller level, but then beef up the criteria on the top level.
And I think that is confusing to people because I think people think that we have the whole 2.7 or $3 million budget when we have 400,000 because it gets, you know, scraped off the top right away.
So thank you for that, Lindsay. You kind of, you naturally said, so thank you for that. Taking what she was just doing. In that tangent you went down, what if there was a pathway to become a cultural institution? What if there was an accountability to maintain your status as a cultural institution? What if we funded, what did you say, a gallery?
An up and coming
gallery. Let's do that right now. What if is a great way to ask the question and make it a little like easier where you don't have to come up with like a perfect answer. So I want what if questions from all of you of like, what are these things? And put yourselves as the innovator. Like to your point, Beth, of we want to fund innovation. let's also think from a perspective of this committee will become an innovator for funders, that you will all in the next 2024, whenever this gets approved, a timeline, I always forget how that happens, that you will take a step in innovation as a funding committee, that you will be doing things different. Is that enough to go on for this exercise? What if statements? Imagine. And we'll start with what Lindsay said. So thank you, Lindsay. You're already starting to start finding it clear. What if we created a pathway to become a cultural institution or maintain their status as a cultural institution? What if we funded pop-up galleries regardless of 501c3 status?
What if you had one pot of funds?
Yeah.
Right now, you have one pot of funds that's divided at least 4 ways that I'm aware of.
Technically, would be artist access to the developing.
Well, Artist Access Development are operating in the cultural institutions.
Our 3 tiers.
Oh, yeah.
Regional grants, we have.
Oh, yeah,
large,
exactly.
medium.
Yeah, the criteria is different based on how much you can ask for and all that.
Yeah.
sort of stuff.
So what if we had one pot of funds?
On what if we integrated what we're doing here with what the art council is doing?
Yes. Like, we were talking about the artist access, what if we could just say, you come to me today and we fund you immediately? Artists are visual, they don't really plan much beyond the next project or current project.
Well, what if to that, there's a contingency fund or dedicated fund of pitch is a good idea and we'll entertain it?
Because in all honesty, we are busy in this committee for a month and a half, and then we enjoy each other's company.
Seems like a
Yeah.
Yeah.
You haven't even got the rest of them.
These are the troublemakers.
Picks up.
Cause it gets down to the rest of the months. It's like,
Yes.
what are we gonna change? What are we gonna tweak on the wording to make this more clear? Cause we're not getting that, because we really don't have the power or authority to really change anything.
Right.
It's like, how can we make the application process better so we get better applications so we can,
Sure.
Change the adjectives.
Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah.
I'm sorry, what'd you
I
say?
said change the adjectives. That's all we can do.
What
oil
if
blow
we
is
could
fine.
change more than the adjectives?
What if we could set up full-time programs to train artists?
I like that.
Artists, train them in what?
How to do this,
The basics of.
How to run a business.
how to be a business.
You're a dancer. If you want to do that, that's a business. How do you promote yourself? How do you, what do you do with the dollars that you, other than rent and utilities, I get on that. But what do you need to be able to be successful?
Right? I'll throw one in that I've seen I was living in New York City previously, is there were institutions that could fiscally sponsor artists, so that rather than push them to become a nonprofit themselves, you could pay like $100 a month and get someone else's nonprofit status, that you could accept donations and apply for yourself.
So being a fiscal agent.
$100 a month.
I'm gonna get the 3% currently, but anyway, that's another conversation.
Operations. What if we funded the operations of an individual artist? Housing, food,
Yeah,
insurance.
just professional development.
And so much of the existing program, not that I recommend we change it, is locally based, but what is the recruitment effort to bring art to the community from outside?
And what is our footprint? I always go back and forth on
City limits
city limits.
is a footprint, but we've funded
Yeah.
organizations outside because they make a good case that they serve Wichita.
I was not interested.
The way you said that, the last two also, there's something in there about like, what if we funded like city artists and residents?
Yes, that's sort of where it's.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting
Yeah.
at. My question was
Yeah.
how large and what is that? We may have artists, like you say, that is working in person, but they're bringing work down and creating value to Wichita. Yeah.
One thing that came up, there was. When asked the question in the focus groups of, do you feel that Wichita is a place where you can be an artist, where you can work as an artist, you can have a job in the arts, even if you're like arts administration? One group laughed when I first asked the question. They were like, no, not at all. So there were visual reactions to this. And then when specifically in the focus group with community artists, they were very aware of which of the houses, the theaters pay and what they pay artists. You'll get paid for a stipend for performing, but you don't get paid for the weeks of rehearsal. Or you'll get paid, they lean into paying graduate, collegiate level talent because they are a little more, they're cheaper, but then the professional artists in town can't get work because they know what their rate should be. Similarly, if you're a performer, turnover is a little higher. You just know that in your field because you have to audition and the shows change. But if you're a lighting person, if you land the one lighting job a theater needs, you're never leaving it. And then all of a sudden, like,
There's no
doors close, there's no, so I'm wondering, like, what if you could get paid as, like, what if there were arts jobs in the city? What if, like, full time?
So a couple of thoughts. One of the things that's come to light as we're going through annual reports and figuring out what the funding is actually being used for from different organizations is some of the organizations are using the city funds to then pay to utilize city services or city facilities, which is happening. So what if you couldn't use city funds to pay for city stuff? Or to cover city expenses elsewhere?
There is.
I don't know how that would work, but that is a known thing that's happening with this fund, where they're using it to pay for rent at Century 2 or other
Oh, I
things.
see.
So that money's just cycling through. Not to say that that's wrong, but in truly thinking about this money should be used to spur economic development in its current model. We're just paying ourselves in this cycle.
Which city facilities are available to developing artists, just artists without that
Yeah.
barrier of entry,
Well, or maybe that these applicants, because they've got to get revenue somewhere, but maybe if, that would disallow larger organizations, but what if, applicants didn't have to pay for use of city facilities to flip it the other way? Because the revenue stream is limited. So what's another way that we can help them without?
Right, if you get a grant for $1,000 and on top of that, we say you've got a year's worth of rehearsal space at one of the city facilities.
Huge.
Another thought is, Jesse, I feel like you sent me an article about, is it Dublin or Ireland as a country, did a pilot program on funding individual artists as just culture bearers in the community. And I can't quote the exact program, but essentially they gave an artist stipend or a monthly allowance to artists who are registered within the program just to see how that would work within the community. So, and thinking about like what radical ways could we utilize this funding to keep our artists here and employed and not drain them to other entities or other professions.
There was a lot of comments about people's experience in other cities with performing arts centers and the desire to have just graduated college and you're a painter or a singer or a dancer or, insert vocation there, where there isn't necessarily a community space encouraging you to, or creating opportunity for you to go and submit new work to be shown. You have to just be able to put up your own show. Someone else mentioned, I wrote not down the names so I could find them for examples, but someone else mentioned how there were city. I don't know if that's city capital C or city lowercase c, that it's just happening in the city versus the city's funding it, but. Competitions for young emerging theater artists to write a script and you submit it and you then get it produced. And that's your first credit as having like your directorial debut, and it's sponsored by a city entity or city performing arts center. So those were some things that also came up in the focus groups that people were naming could be interesting.
And I think I don't know how it would fit because of all the change that we're throwing out there, but the opportunity for multi-year.
Yes.
If you're doing a good job, why don't I make you jump through the hoop again?
Asking the same question here.
Exactly.
No, and I think that reminds me of the challenge we've had sometimes when we have had organizations. I can think of like Harvester Arts, I just named it. So Harvester Arts comes in and, we want to help them because they're helping the artists, but it's like one step removed.
Right.
And the way this structure works, it doesn't work well for us to fund Harvester Arts, even though they're doing it. So there's some way
Right.
to take that out.
Which is interesting because
Yeah.
Harvester Arts was one organization named by a lot of community members as
Yeah,
they're feeling a lot of appreciation for it. And then you look at Harvester Arts and they just got Wi-Fi because they had been borrowing it from the hair salon.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't
Yeah.
afford it
so
consistently.
I guess the what if, Larry, is what
Yeah,
if
yeah,
in the plan, we can support the Harvester Arts type of organizations that are.
That's the
supporting
incubator.
artists. Yeah,
the incubator. Yeah.
Not that I love match grants, but what if there's a way to like incentivize or leverage city dollars against private dollars or other projects? I'm thinking on the smaller level, not on like the massive organizational scale, but if an artist has raised $50 to create a new body of work, can the city match it? So that that lessens the risk a little bit financially, or it shows that there's financial buy-in from the partner. But it's also the city backing. We're saying we see that this has potential. And we see that you've done other legwork and are not just seeing the city as a shakedown.
And Larry, you indicated earlier that some of the keys were, walkability, transportation, et cetera, not being that, well, call the arts deserts. I feel like it's stealing from the food deserts, right? But the arts deserts, I don't think this group, I think this group has been very attuned to that. But there's no incentive in the granting process to help you with that.
Right.
So to that reminds me that we pulled up, and we have this available if anyone wants to look at it, we don't have to look at it, but this is the survey results that we did last fall from the applicants and the committee members themselves. And the two big highlights that both parties agreed upon was operational expenses were important, but then serving historically underserved or historically marginalized populations, which could be geography and all sorts of different things. But I think both parties recognize that there is a need in the community that should be prioritized.
I wonder too, to that point, is there a way? Understanding that there would be a lot of other pieces, but just for the sake of today, is there a way to identify the the arts deserts and say like these grants only fund projects in areas where there aren't currently offerings versus, or, like, can it even be rotating in that way where it's like trying to work your way through where arts and culture can eventually touch every zip code in Wichita?
Something that Lindsay just said a moment ago got me to thinking when she said, we know you've raised $50. We're gonna match that. I was thinking like, do we want to think about grants that go down to $50? Like, we don't, like 500 was the smallest last year. For
But we've given smaller than that.
organization, but I'm saying like, are there those artists out there who are truly the struggling artists who could use $50, $75 to buy a new set of pastels or to replace, to buy a new set of canvases. Are there students who could be identified by their teachers as someone who could use an arts councils or, a scholarship to city arts to further refine and explore what they're doing? Like, I think that there are more options to within this funding source to find artists.
And I want to piggyback on your what if.
Yeah,
What if,
right up, climb on up there.
thank you. What if there was additional funding for supplies for emerging artists?
Mhm.
That you didn't have to apply for a grant to get money to get pastels, but that there was a different kind of pathway to get that. You know what I mean?
And there's probably some requirements there, like you have to actually be, but to know that you are an artist. And you're not just like, I think I'll take up painting, and you get, a full, beautiful set. But yeah, I think that absolutely.
And so I think there lies with it. I get that. But I think we're gonna have that constant pull and tug of, are we for, are we gonna focus on operational?
Right.
I think that's part of the discussion that has to occur. It is are the dollars only going to be for operational expenditures?
And to this whole big what if discussion, I mean, this is a dream, like to Jesse's point, I mean, I love the arts because as a child, it gave me an outlet and a way to get in. So what if we just had like United Way with you want to just take a painting, come grab a set of painters, just walk on in, say hi to Jesse and grab a set and leave.
Yeah, great, goodbye.
Yeah, because that's where it starts. I mean, when we have our discussion about funding the library, I'm a big proponent, some way, because that's an entry level for these underserved populations to get involved with literacy and the arts in general. I mean, every neighborhood has a small library, and that's how I got involved in our community center, started doing painting and ceramics. These are what the city should be focusing on, is getting that grassroots love of culture and then the larger pot of money we're giving out, the operational funding is just expanding upon that.
What is the relationship of funding for the city to Wichita Public Schools?
Don't believe there is one.
Third party partners.
Getting partner, yeah.
Through funding we're
Indirect.
So the MTW's Gesture Judge program, are you familiar with those?
Mhm.
So I
Used to be a
did,
judge.
I did
I want
it,
to see those.
Used to be a joke.
I did it 2 summers ago, I think it was. And when you go, you get assigned your school and your show, and you get a profile ahead of time. And in it, it includes a question about, I'm gonna say this wrong, but it was something along the lines of like, what's your funding like for your musical theater program, your theater program? And I only went to 2. I think I was assigned 2 schools, maybe 3, but all of them, with the exception of the private school, the public schools were like, well, we can pay for next year's show off of ticket sales for this year. And then I, as the teacher, threw in $500. And so, but like, there was no, but that's from a what if the city was cultivating these artists from an even younger place or supporting it in that kind of way?
Can I segue a hair, just that first for time?
And
So
also, I'm done. I could go on this.
Oh,
forever,
yeah,
okay?
I think we all did. The previous iteration of the plan wrote a couple sectors of arts and culture out. Not that I disagree or agree one way or another, but this is also an opportunity to think about like, what is the role of arts and culture? Which is the bigger picture of what we're doing. Is this culinary arts? Is it, how expansive do we interpret it? Or do we tighten it up because the funding is tight? So for reference, the amendment in 2013 for the plan wrote out botanical gardens and zoological. So I'm not sure the whole history of any of that, but so presumably Botanica and Sedgwick County Zoo are not eligible to apply. Just putting that on the table and thinking about the greater arts and cultural sector. We added in film at that point, I believe. So I think the way the sector is changing, do we look at game design?
Video games, yep.
How are we defining the sector? And in my professional expertise and paranoia and everything is the more we define art, the worse it gets.
Yes.
So that's my caveat with this conversation, but for the sake of, we do need some criteria. What are we defining and what are we not defining? Or are we just gonna entertain good pitches? And I say we, you as the committee,
That's a good
what
point.
is the most pragmatic way to address this?
That's a good point, that the criteria of, the content criteria has become a barrier of entry, but what it sounds like needs to be addressed from a criteria standpoint is a little bit of this big fish versus the little fish, like taking all the dollars, where it's like, is there an opportunity where the criteria is written in a way that allows structure, allows clarity, but the shape, the ever-changing shape of content that is the arts would never become like a limitation within that.
And then maybe one more sentiment to think about, to segue a little bit, is the malleability. That word.
I wrote that there
Yeah.
too.
Of the plan itself, because the current plan identifies success. What happened?
It's
We've been working a lot together. And thinking about a pandemic, how can you translate these funds to meet the community where it is? So what we don't want to do is create a new plan and it solves the community today, and then our community changes tomorrow and we are not prepared to move with it. So we want to have malleability within this plan, within the funding program to, if we need to shift this to emergency relief funds, we should be able to have the fluidity to do it. And currently, and I was not here through the pandemic, that wasn't super possible. Is that correct? So, in thinking about, like, we need criteria, but we need flexibility in
Right.
that criteria, or the committee needs authority to make changes.
Well, which that would give you more things to do in the months.
Yeah.
Outside of a month and a half, is you're like, well, next year, what do we want to do? You could have some changes there. Well, thank you for this exercise. I hope that was helpful. It's a good place to start with getting out of the weeds of it for a minute and know that the goal of this is to get to a place where the criteria is changed for these types of things to be resolved. Again, another goal is that it will align with the mission, the overall vision and mission of arts and culture as a whole. We also know that the Arts Council is going through a strategic plan, and we have a desire to meet with their consultant as well to make sure that just everything is talking to each other. So thank you all for your time today.
Yeah, and thank you, Larry, for coming in and leading this session. This conversation didn't solve anything for the sake of the plan today, and it will be ongoing. We know we have many committee members not here. We also know that, like, you're gonna wake up tonight at 2 a.m. and be like, I have that idea. Send that to Larry or myself if you have any great ideas, or say, oh, I forgot about this. Please know that the conversation doesn't stop today. But thank you for your service to the committee, and for being flexible with shifting the dates for this summer as well. Jesse, I'll be sure to update your calendars if he hasn't already. Anything else?
Nope.
Anything else? We're over time, so
Okay, fine.
we are adjourned. Thank you.